Now, just looking at the epigraph, the end cover of the new volume by my next guest, Ezra Williams. Let it go in. Senor Moreno would endorse, I think, on noticing that he mentioned, so ring the bells that can still ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. That's from 92, and it's primordial. More good stuff in just a moment. Now, before we begin this conversation with Ezra Williams, I should just issue a very strong language warning for this first segment. Right, so Ezra Williams, my old friend, welcome back to the Chim with Selected Writings. How the dickens are you?
Well, thank you for having me, Andy. It's lovely to be back. I'm very well, thanks. I hope you've had a nice summer. And, I'm here to, talk about my new book, Selected Pieces.
Wonderful. Now, last night you were singing, directing La Traviata, right?
Well, actually, no, it was a 7-hour rehearsal of Traviata.
My God, you're looking well on that.
We open in a couple of weeks in Normansfield Theatre in Hampton Wick.
Yeah.
That's with Instant Opera. And I'm not conducting that.
Mm-hmm.
Louis Gaston is conducting that. But basically, I've coached all the singers, rehearsed everyone as a repetiteur, and rehearse the chorus and everything. So we're pretty much there with the production, and we open in a couple of weeks.
Serious paperwork. Are you also singing within the are you singing a role in the cast or not?
Not in that one, no.
Okay.
Repetiteur is a big enough job without having to sing.
I should at the beginning of Valley for Money as it is.
But there's another couple of productions coming up that I will be singing in.
And of course you direct Harrow Opera as well, don't you?
Well, yes, we're about to start rehearsing a double bill.
Yeah.
Of Menotti's The Medium and Puccini's Il Tabarro, which is an interesting double bill there. Don't think has been done before. The Medium isn't done very often, but is a remarkably wonderfully creepy ghost. Well, it's not a ghost story. The main lady, the medium, thinks it's a ghost, and it isn't a ghost. And she ends up accidentally killing someone that she shouldn't. Thinking it's a ghost, and the opera ends with her singing, "I've killed the ghost," and the idea being that you can't kill a ghost, so she's obviously lost her mind. It would have
sent her somewhat round the bend.
She's completely lost her mind. And Il Tabarro is, of course, Puccini was a good long time before that. We're talking 1914, something like 1912.
Yeah.
Il Tabarro, but again ends with a death, and again a misunderstanding. So they sort of mirror each other in a way, despite the fact that they're nearly, 80 years apart.
And you guys are ranging. I mean, I think the last thing you did was Die Fledermaus, wasn't it? So we're very different territory here.
And Fledermaus was just before that.
Oh, right, yeah.
They tend to. I didn't push them. I didn't bully them. I'm not that kind of person. But I suggested doing a comic one because they don't often do comic ones. Harrow Opera's known for doing quite serious, works. We've done Rusalka. We've done, A Masked Ball, Verdi's Un ballo in maschera. We've done some very heavy, big, tragedies. With Fledermaus, it was nice to let one's hair down and just have an absolute hoot, despite not having that many dancers in it. But no, it was great. Really good fun.
Groovy. Now, you have the knack of getting amateurs, I suppose, but embarking professionals to dive in to this. I would say, and this is my description, apologies if it's inappropriate, sort of gonzo style. I mean, there's the 7 hours to get this ready. It's a huge amount of work. It's a huge ask for people. But you bring it off. And I am beginning to think about, if I may, that sort of territory, that sort of mindset, and the way you write, and the way you do other things. Do you think there's a connection here?
Well, the obvious connection. The two obvious connections with my new book. One is in the title, Selected Pieces. As in, I deliberately chose that because musical pieces, So there is that connection, but also the musicality, I hope, in the prose, that I always try to... When I was I do still compose a little bit.
Glad to hear it.
In fact, I've just been commissioned to write a musical, which is new for me.
There's another
I can't say much more about that because it's literally early days. But I used to compose a lot of big orchestral music, and some of it's on YouTube you can check out. My Requiem's been done online.
Terrific.
And a piece called Waking Garden.
There's a winter that sounds like very much what they...
Yes,
wonderful thing. Yes, we'll
but
pick
anyway,
it out. Yeah.
I can't remember. It was a long time ago that piece was done. But I always found a beautiful element of design within orchestral scores, and studying, Ravel's scores.
Looking elegant on the page.
Yes, and if it doesn't, if it looks awkward on the page, I just kind of think that maybe I'm being sentimental or romantic.
Well, I'm thinking about my handwriting. Well, I'll say no more than that. Anyway, yeah.
But it's sort of there's a design element to it, and even the composers who wrote very untidily, there's still something very beautiful about it. Obviously, Bach is the one that wrote most gorgeously. It looks like artwork.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. But also when I write prose, I think there is a certain design element. But of course, I do follow certain linguistic rules. So this book is basically 23 comic essays on all different subjects, but with an underlying musical theme, I guess.
There's a sort of enigma thing going on here, you were saying.
Well, there is. I'll get onto that in a sec. I mean, the musicality stuff varies from, I think, Nat King Cole to Pierre Boulez. It's a very wide thing. But the design element, for example, you make sure the last line of each paragraph is probably the most powerful of that paragraph and presages the next paragraph. So I wouldn't necessarily do that in strict prose. But in journalism and essay form, then certainly I've tried to adhere to that. And also my obsession, you could call it, with trying to avoid the internal chimes.
Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, yes, those kind of stubbed toes of prose. There's one, stubbed toes of prose. Well, there you go. You'd never write that as a sentence. But it's impossible to get rid of all of them.
Yeah.
Nobody can get rid of all of them. But you try your best. So, for example,
it's a thing in broadcasting, for sure.
Well,
every
sentence should be cast with a certain degree of care. So you would never say, I would never sort of say, the reporter ignored the evidence, because there's too much or, reporter, ignore. It just doesn't, the internal chime. And there is another quick thing, if I may, that writers, I think, can't really properly read their own stuff until a certain while after the book's been done. I mean, properly sit down and read it. And no writer curls up with their own stuff, let's be honest. That's for the reader to do.
Yeah.
But I did obviously, because I've had to do this and a couple of other interviews about the book, I did obviously have to look through it. And I found one terrible chime. I won't say where it is, but I've only found one that I missed. So I'm fairly happy with that, in a 200-page book. If there's one internal chime that I've missed, it's a bad one though. I think it's clink and drink.
Okay.
And they occur not next to each other, but in consecutive lines, and that is not good enough.
Well, I would imagine. I mean, if we're Sondheim here, I think he'd let you off under the circumstances.
Well, absolutely.
I mean, Snuffy and West Side Story and all that,
But it works in that way.
Yeah.
That's fine. You're not supposed to take them out.
Yes.
In
you
that
could
genre.
sing them. They could. That's what the reader might just do that.
Well, maybe. I mean, they are comic, as I said. I do see myself as a comic writer.
Yeah, and that in your case allows you, as it has many, a pretty broad church. I mean, are you taking this as a fundamental sort of point of view? I mean, you talk about your ridiculous life, as most of us would at some point, but the fact that things happen improbably, but also you have made a point, it seems to me, of diving into various avenues, gone where the work is.
Yes, I mean, I am sort of... An ex-girlfriend of mine described me as someone that stuff just happens to.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if we're allowed to use rude words on this show.
Let's try.
Let's try. I said, in reply, I said, I don't ask for this shit, it just comes to no one goes out of their way to have a ridiculous life. But yes, I mean, there have been really odd things that have happened to me.
Yeah.
And lots of stuff I haven't ever written about and probably would never write about. So I try to stick to the comic because I kind of feel there's been a lot of tragedy in my life, and I kind of feel a moral obligation in some way to laugh about it. Perhaps that's life-affirming. Perhaps that's the way I deal with it. Perhaps it's therapy. Who knows?
There's a certain irony here. One of the two pieces I'd like to focus on, if I may, which is a sort of love story, and as it were, an expat romance in Crete. You talk about, as a couple, you two being sad, but the preceding text indicates anything but, just complicated, like most good couples are. And then, firstly, we're talking about the small matter of testicular flipping cancer.
Indeed.
Now, I think the way you've written about something that is deeply personal, not only for you, but for your intended audience and every man, is one of the most pellucid expositions of what can happen to people increasingly. You know, there's been a bit of flurry about Bob Monkhouse, for example, on the social media just before we're talking today. But I think it's not only necessary, it's vital, you know. So at what point were you able to write about this? Did you diarise it? And you're talking about it also, the vexed business of men and emotion as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I think I talk about this in the piece on testicular cancer, which is called On Testicular Cancer. I didn't want to give it an arty-farty title. I wanted it to be definite. This is what it's about. If you don't want to read this, don't. We should just quickly interject that, of course, if you wish to dive into this book and read any one essay, comic essay, I should add, on any particular subject, you can. That's perfectly fine. But if you wish to read it from beginning to end, you may find that there's something else, a bigger conceit, perhaps, going on.
So these biggies are actually, say, they presumably they work because they're part of this wider, shall we say, symphonic structure, or whatever you want to call it. This
I mean, I prefer conceit, but
conceit's better, yeah.
But the testicular cancer one is 99.9% absolutely true. Now, the reason why I specified that is because no good writer of prose, I think, can be 100% true, because it would produce so much dead language. Also, don't forget, in real life, dialogue is absolutely abysmally trite. You know, if we
especially in a situation like this, because how do you say the right thing? How do you react?
You know, it's such a the whole medical investigation of something like cancer is so ridiculous.
And this chap they send as a befriender is really anything but, isn't he? I mean, he chases after you at one point.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally ridiculous. But it totally happened. And
yes.
the inviting people into the room sounds like pure slapstick.
Yeah.
But it actually, again, it just makes me laugh, because I think, you know, having been through that, I just found the whole situation so ridiculous. And when they ask you to give a sperm sample, which I don't think I've written about in this article, because that wasn't particularly part of the actual testicular cancer.
Yeah.
They ask you to do that as an extra, just in case you know, can't father children in the future.
Just wander into this cubicle, so, and all that.
Yeah. But so what happened during that was that they sent me into the wrong room. they sent me into the room with the gay porn.
Okay.
Not with the hetero porn.
Yeah.
Which is totally fine.
Yeah.
But
it would create a functional issue.
A little issue if you're not gay. Now, I'd be the luckiest man alive if I was gay, but I unfortunately am not. So it's very hard in that situation anyway.
Yeah.
To get, you know, to produce a sperm sample, let alone when you're not, you know. And I thought, that's so ridiculous. It's that kind of thing that you just think.
I was directed to the wrong funeral recently, and again, you think Robert Altman lives, doesn't he? And it says these situations,
just total slapstick, but you know.
Yeah.
And then having to go out of the room and try to explain to the lady on the reception desk why you can't supply the sample, you know, in front of all the waiting men. You're just thinking, this is just, it's bonkers, but yeah.
The good Admiral advice about the sound cook, you remember that? The other week comes to mind. Ezra Williams' marvellous new piece, new anthology, Selected Pieces, which is published by tslbooks.uk. Recently, or a little while ago, Ez took part in the performance of a new opera. He is himself a composer, and that's that musical on Strokes in a moment, about which we'll talk in a bit, hopefully. And this piece is by the son of a former controversial, illustrious Channel 4 Chief Commissioner, Farouk Dondi. He's also a novelist. His son, Daniel, is a composer, and Ez and Alistair Sutherland here appear as at the tail end of a piece called The Open Cage, which is about the myth of Icarus and Daedalus.
No stone, no chain, nor anything but blue. White fire and more fire. No more birds, they too surpassed. It's no time to bask in smaller glories, while a fear recedes its and I, they're burning out. Perspectives bleed. Do the stars ask? Would be a phoenix. The heat is of a different quality. Heaven reeks of singed feathers, and the light is blinding, blinding light. The character of lightning. Who cuts the sky in half? I. And you are gone into the white. The feather fall. The brilliant light beyond the reach of the tops, beyond my reach, beyond the scope of love. The sky is an empty shade of blue. Your feathers fall like waxy tears. I look up and the sunlight sears my eyes. I'll burn them out to look for you, Nicholas. Come back to me now. Come back when soul is whole and not lost.
Again, it's the stuff that isn't said. I mean, I think I met her briefly. Your former partner, H, is rather Celia Johnson stoic in the situation. There's a lot that's said by her not being there and just twitching a hand back that I think is very often the way that people react in these things. It's actually how the British react in these things, stiff upper lip, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, you did know H, of course.
Yes.
And of course, H is still a good friend of mine. In
That's
fact, she recently had a baby, so congratulations.
Great lady, yeah.
There's a lot of good, insightful prose on her reactions, because I felt that said more than my reactions, because I was sort of expecting what was going to happen.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit where I explained that my body just knew what was going to be diagnosed. I just felt it somehow in my core. So when the consultant diagnosed testicular cancer, I wasn't in the slightest surprised.
That's almost a female intuition. Of course, it's a couple intuition as well, isn't it?
But I've since spoken to several people who've had cancer of different types, and a lot of them have said something similar.
There's something there.
You just sort of feel it.
Yeah.
It's because it's an alien thing in your body. It shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
And you just sort of know. I don't know what it is.
Does it change? You don't really say this in the piece, I think, but does it change your worldview in the way that, say, fatherhood does?
Yeah, not as much as fatherhood.
No.
But yes, it did. It made me more. I started doing a lot of charity work because I felt that there wasn't a lot of, there wasn't, first of all, a lot of medical feedback from men about self-checking, which I go into a great deal in the piece. And men are notoriously bad at self-checking.
Yeah.
And I, like many men, was misdiagnosed for a long time. Then I started working with Everyman Cancer, which isn't such a big thing anymore. We switched to Cancer Research UK.
Do you remember this mass checking at the 4 o'clock in Frinton or something like that?
We did, we broke a world record.
Marvellous.
We did,
yes.
With a bunch of guys called The Testicle Tour, who were still going.
Yes.
And Darren Couchman and Richard P. Miller on that. Hi, guys.
Yes.
And Yeah, they're fabulous. And we broke a world record. It has since been broken by the Americans.
A bitter pill, but at the same time, in a good way.
I know. Well, we hope to claim it back at some point.
Yes, totally. Well, it's the thing is on such an important visceral scale that it needs to be done, and it will be done, I'm sure.
That was a great day, yeah. And I also, at that, apart from being one of the people who took part in the self-checking, breaking the world record, also sang Puccini arias.
Yeah. Simultaneously?
Not simultaneously.
No, that would take a bit of avant-garde direction, wouldn't it?
That would have been a bit,
It's wearing a tennis red, not it?
Yeah, that would have been a bit twisting in the vice, so to speak.
Sure, yeah. Would you like to read something now?
Oh, sure, if I may. This is a very brief extract from, basically, I won't say too much about it because I'm always aware of kind of slightly spoiling it for the reader if
it's
they know
you dive into, really, isn't it?
Yeah, as I said, you can dip in or read the whole thing. It's entirely up to you. This one is an essay on basically sex in all its ridiculous forms.
Someone's got to do it.
Yeah, in all its ridiculous forms, and again the comedy of it. Because sex it's wonderful, but it's also inherently comic act.
At its best, perhaps, yes.
Yeah, there's something about, and of course, let's not forget that laughter is the best form of birth control. So this is a true story, a bit of a gonzo piece about my student entanglement.
Research.
Yeah, research, obviously, with a
lady of the night.
A prostitute in Kilburn, of all places.
Yeah.
So anyway, it goes. In those days, you made a call. They named their price and gave you an address, and you simply turned up and buzzed the bell, with, in my case, a complicated bag of feelings. Apprehension, exhilaration, a hot, torpid hunger, and an almost physical, painful longing for tremendous stretches of bare female skin that you had paid to touch. Here was the future. But no, it was a fiasco. Buzzed in, I ascended the stairs of the building in Kilburn. I was a student, and £40 was £40, and was greeted at the door by a tiny, fierce lady in the shape of a capital O. I had never seen so perfectly rotund a human before, but had little time to consider this, as I noticed over her shoulder in the kitchen of the flat a slobbering Rottweiler with demon-encrusted eyes under the linoleum-topped table. Who puts linoleum on a table, I thought, as I entered, paid, and was directed to a room at the end of a corridor flanked floor to ceiling in red, burgundy and vermilion drapes. I noticed the carpet hadn't been cleaned, but the drapes were heavily scented. Yet as I approached my assigned room, all I could hear was the huge dog, panting as if in great lust in the kitchen behind, a constant beat in the ear. Any inkling of sexiness had unequivocally vanished. With a resigned shrug, I went in. There was no one there. I sat on the side of the red bed for a bit and imagined what getting an erection, let alone maintaining one, might be like. Then I looked around. There was ease in the decor, a beguiling simplicity chest of drawers, tall cupboard and 2 pink bedside tables. Unsure of due etiquette, I didn't open any drawers. Perhaps that was a test. Who knew? On a reclining chair in one corner, a beige cardigan balding at the elbows lay crumpled. Then the assigned lady came in and introduced herself as Tony. Tony was at least 15 years older than me and looked like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. Jaded, but not drug-addled. She carried herself with grace, like a dancer, yet when she stood still, her feet were at 10 to 2, almost like a duck's. Well versed enough to read my deflated expression, she said, "I'm going to get freshened up. Would you like to watch a video while you wait for me?" Tony, it struck me, wasn't the best hooker name of all time, but she seemed to be conscientious, so I duly agreed and pressed play on the remote as she left the room. Nothing happened. I got up to take a look at the VCR. Something was clearly wrong, so I fiddled a couple of the leads, and the TV screen suddenly flashed up static and the ear-shattering volume. Yes, an utter fiasco. But Tony, as it happened, was fairly sweet, abrupt, honest and clear. One thing that I never forgot, she asked me if I had a girlfriend. I lied, and after we had finished, she ruffled my hair. It would be remiss of me, perhaps irresponsible, to end without a word on love. In the only story, Julian Barnes writes, "But don't ever forget, everyone has their love story. Everyone. It may have been a fiasco. It may have fizzled out. It may never even have got going. It may have been all in the mind. That doesn't make it any less real. Sometimes it makes it more real. Sometimes you see a couple and they seem bored witless with one another, and you can't imagine them having anything in common or why they're still living together. But it's not just habit or complacency or convention or anything like that. It's because once they had their love story. Everyone does. It's the only story."
Ezra Williams, Julian Barnes, very much on the same page there. That's so adroitly quoted, and I think you're basically, the connection is palpable. And you're a great breaker, it seems to me, and Will Self perhaps is another locally, of taboos. And is this something you go after, or is it something that comes naturally because of what's happened to you?
Well, that's an interesting question, because someone did a review of a book of mine recently, not this one, the previous book, Fairy Tales and Oddities, and said that I like tackling big themes. So I wasn't. You see, to me, they don't seem that big themes. I presume they were talking about suicide. There's racism as well.
There's some very dark stuff.
There's some dark stuff, but I still approach it as
handled.
in a comic manner.
Yeah.
Because again, it may be laughter in the dark, but it's still a way in, and also it distances the writer from it. So, for example, that racism story, it was originally in the first person, but I wasn't silly enough to keep it in the first person. I changed it to third person just to get that distance and show that actually I'm shining a comic light and heaping humiliation upon humiliation on this person.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I have had people, write into my publisher and say I must be all kinds of horrible things. Someone actually complained to a boss of mine at a job, nothing to do with writing. A boss that somehow I, shouldn't be doing that job because of what I'd written. And I was just like, well, if writers can only write about what they know, it would be jolly boring, wouldn't it? Writers would only write about writers. And it would just be dull.
Well, it has to be said, as I think the casual peruse of the Sunday Suns from time to time would suggest there's a lot of it about. A lot, perhaps, of insecurity. And, we live in a time of cancel culture, which you write a little bit about, I think, with regard to the trans debate in a book review, and tackle pretty robustly, which I think is a very fine thing. What do you see the future of that as being?
I've always had I think it's entirely arbitrary.
Yeah.
I've always had a strange sort of relationship with cancel culture, because there are so many people that I can think of who, if anyone deserved to be cancelled, should have been, but have not. And obviously I'm not going to name any names. But there are other people, like the whole Philip Schofield thing recently. You think, well, he hasn't actually done anything illegal. He's not a paedophile. There hasn't been anything, and this kind of new Puritanism that I talk about. The
optics.
That now it seems like one isn't allowed to, have a relationship with a guy. No one used to care about that at all.
I think it was rife in the 1970s, and a little bit later on, there is a, glorious revelation account of you as a male model. Good on you, having a lot of fun, but also having a lot of fun perspicaciously.
But also more recently on operas, I have had relationships with other people, other women who are involved in a production.
You hold each other, don't you, to hear, remember you telling me,
but it's such a close sort of relationship
to each other.
This stuff has happened, but I always bear in mind that if I'm the music director, then I try not to, because even though I'm not actually in charge of their income, I'm sort of on the panel of the company. So I don't do that, because that could be seen as an abuse. It's
sort of managerial,
Yeah, you just have to be mindful of these things. Yeah. But if you're a singer, and a fellow singer, who you might have known for 20 years, you may have even had a little, affair back 20 years ago. It doesn't seem, it just seems now that everyone's terrified.
It's the greatest fear, the fear itself. Well, judge for yourselves. Selected pieces by Ezra Williams available from tslbooks.uk. It's interesting to reflect on the fact that the operatic world, for all its alleged highfalutiness, very often centres on plots that are demotic, for one thing, like Willie the Shakes. But take that to an elevated level, but very much concern, shall we say, earthly dilemmas. Here's another that concerns a courtesan, and Poirot wrote this in the 1730s. It wound up the Met, courtesy of Giacomo Puccini, and a little bit before that, Daniel Aubert set the same text. Neither knew of the other's work, but when he heard about it, Puccini said, well, could Manon not have more than one lover? Anyway, polyamory in the modern age, or very near the modern age. This is Donna non vidi mai, when the hero discovers this woman and apprehends a kind of beauty he hasn't hitherto encountered. A bucolic ovation, rightly so, for Ezra Williams' marvellous voice singing Puccini at the Opera Cafe a little while ago. Now, back to his writing. I think this book, amongst many things, in a slightly nostalgic way, but I think in a way that's published now, is a very interesting curative healer against that sort of energy. And I'm thinking also about one of the other significant pieces of the book, your meeting with Dee by accident. Dee, the sometime classical guitarist in Crete.
Well, it wasn't entirely by accident. I do call her up.
Yeah, sure, but you went there for an entirely different purpose.
Yeah, it wasn't intended to see her. That wasn't. Yeah, that was a. Yeah, I do feel that's one of the kind of. It's kind of the. It's not. It's not up to me or anything to say which is my favourite in the book, but it seems to me one with the most heart. There seems to be a lot of love in that piece. It's called Crete and the Bougainvillea, which, if you don't know, is the pink flowering bush that is all over Crete and Greece. And I was sort of entranced by it. I thought it was absolutely wonderful. But of course, Bougainvillea and the ball. Which of course ties into Knossos and the Minotaur. And in the final paragraphs of that piece, I shouldn't really say this and give it away, but I tie all these three things in together. Yeah. And it ends with this bull staring at us over a fence.
It'll take you a while to get to that, gentle reader, but you're going to enjoy it.
Yeah, it's one of my... I do like that piece. I have a big I have a great liking for that. And Dee, of course, is so adorable.
She asked you to write this thing, didn't she?
Well, she did.
Can you get me right? Because she knew that you would.
Yeah, because she'd read one of my other books, and she said, I want you to write about this. And because there was something in her life that she couldn't actually do. So for her, any extra publicity about it would be a good thing. But also on moral grounds, I think Dee felt, and Dee is just the initial, that's not her actual, it's not D-E-E.
That's all we need to know.
Yeah. It's just the first letter of a tri-syllable name.
Yeah.
And so, and I think the idea was that she just, and also wanted to tell her story for the person that was involved in that loss, so that when they were older.
If you look at Afghanistan, Iran, places like that, and others, it's kind of timely.
Well, there was that as well. But yeah, I mean, Crete. I adore Crete as well. It's such a beautiful place.
Yeah. And this whole travelogue unfolds that is partly, I suppose, remembered nostalgia, rekindling a relationship, but also just discovering things on the fly. It's a sort of road trip, really, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, you asked me about this a couple of years ago. When you interviewed me about Fairy Tales and Oddities, my previous book, a couple of years ago. And I think it's almost exactly 2 years ago, actually.
It is.
And there was a bit of it. There was a kind of intimation of a travelogue, but there wasn't really properly one. However, in this, I sort of take the idea to a bit of a more extreme. Because certain places have different sorts of... Eddie Izzard used to, or Susie Izzard, I should say now, used to joke about this, that different places have different rhythms. So if you go to Stonehenge, it's kind of woo. If you go to Trump Tower, it's yap-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You know, different places sort of have different musical rhythms or qualities to them. And places, for me, have that. So if I'm in a certain... And Crete was just so romantic, and so, we're just, was kind of, it just fitted up perfectly. There's something later on in America that again felt that this story just worked perfectly there. And also it gives you, as a prose writer, a lot more chance to expand outside of just dialogue and what actually happened.
Yeah.
So you can put in extra geographical stuff around other things. So let's say you meet at a bus stop. Whereas if I write it up, you might meet in front of a famous restaurant down the road where something interesting happened, where you can say something interesting about the neon signs or something, So you just twist it a tiny little bit.
As you would say in the Celtic tradition, this is storytelling, so you might amplify a few elements in order to just
I've never lied about not being a fiction writer. That's what I am.
Sure.
This is a book of journalism, yes. But as I said earlier, there is a sort of mystery conceit that goes on throughout the whole thing. I think actually you mentioned it. And yes, that does play through. But again, it's not important necessarily to try and seek that out. But eagle-eyed readers will probably find that. And it's a little game you can play as a reader if you wish to. And if you don't, that's equally fine. The clue is probably in the dedicatee, who is my son.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a clue in that. And why is that in a different font as well to the rest of it? Yes. So, there are little clues left here and there. I won't say any more.
I think you will find also, as I am now finding, that I need to go back to Fairy Tales and Oddities, which is a piece of hidden profundity and joyousness, and also this. You mentioned during the course of the book, that a horror novel will be forthcoming.
Indeed.
This made me think of some of the trawling around on the internet for some gothic elements and some connections that are, I would say, a little bit dark, but a little bit unexpected. Things that link together through the arcana of the interwobble. Is there a connection in the way modern life is going, where there, as it were, to coin a phrase in the day job at the moment, hidden harms?
That's a fascinating question. I hadn't really looked at it like that. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Gothic. And I'm also a big fan of the Gothic connection to... Edgar Allan Poe turns up in this book, Selected Pieces.
Yeah.
As does, In Cold Blood and all these big kind of, I suppose In Cold Blood isn't quite so Gothic, but it's certainly the film version is.
Yeah.
It's highly Gothic.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I kind of... I'm not sure. I think there's a triteness in life now, which is slightly anti-Gothic. Gothic seems to me a little more stately.
Is it hiding something, do you think, in the sense that, say, London's built in layers? If you dig deep enough, you'll find
Well, possibly, and like an onion in peeling layers, it makes you cry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, yeah.
There's that as well. But, yeah, no, I think there's possibly an insecurity at the core, is what I would say.
Most of us have one.
No, but at the core of society.
Ah, yes.
Of course, we all have our insecurities, but I'm talking about society as a whole. I read a fascinating book recently about the way, when Donald Trump first became president, dealt with allotting jobs in the agricultural sector and the weather sector and all these things. And he clearly didn't understand any of these sectors. So the weather sector is enormously important, scientifically. They save hundreds of thousands of lives per year.
Well, he closed the department eventually, didn't he?
Well, it was ridiculous,
Yes,
He clearly didn't get why, you needed to take certain people from the previous administration, And it was kind of tragic. But what was fascinating about that book was I can't remember what it's called, but the mathematical analyses of these things, like traffic flow, the way that people work out where to put traffic lights, and the way that society works, or the way the markets work. It's all interconnected. And I think there's an insecurity at the centre at the moment. And it's because, I think, of several things, and the new Puritanism, which I mentioned, which again is a very massively insecure thing. Why is suddenly, everyone trying to promote body sensitivity, and yet now you're not even allowed to show a naked body in a catalogue, because everyone's ashamed again. It's very odd. And I think the point of that is because we don't have anyone to look up to. The leaders are so weak, or inconsequential, shall I say, that we're sort of a little bit at a kind of crossroads. In the 90s, whatever you say about Tony Blair, I think he was a fabulous Prime Minister up to a point. Then it all went a bit...
There's always a fork in the road, isn't there?
It went very pear-shaped.
Yeah.
But we had the art to prove it. We had the great novels. We had the great Brit bands. We had Britpop. We had all these amazing... We had the films. Gosh, the films alone. The cinema of that era was just astonishing. And now, of course, what do we have? All the talents migrated out of Britain, as much as they can, those that can afford it. The only one that's come back recently is Zadie Smith. She is back, and she's actually not far from me, where I used to be. Yeah. Fabulous, wonderful writer. Check out her new one. It's really good.
Will do.
She's the only one that's come back. Pretty much all of them have migrated. And, of course, Martin Amis is dead now.
Sure.
And a lot of them have just got... Salman Rushdie has been stabbed. I mean, it's the world we live in now, that we've lost sort of sight of what really matters. May I just add... Winston Churchill, for example, apparently, this may be an apocryphal story, but it's wonderfully illustrative. When asked, why are you spending all this money on the arts and theatres and all this when we could put it into air defences or whatever? And he said, well, if we don't have any money, if we don't have any arts to come back to, then what the hell are we fighting for? And I thought that was very interesting. Whether or not he said it, it doesn't really matter, because it has that desired effect. And I kind of feel the same way, and art is so devalued in this country now.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things he would have embraced was things like ITMAR, which of course had an important role in raising morale, and the post-war therapy that was the Goon Show, and so these things are still with us.
Absolutely.
How many politicians, you go to any conservative club, which occasionally people do for big band rehearsals and things I used to, without any political affiliation, but you see a picture of Churchill up there. And when they're up against it, that's what they look to. I suspect it's what we still look to. He's an emblem of our culture doing its best under difficult circumstances.
Well, it's how far do you want to take the ridiculousnly? I mean, I wrote a piece recently, very recently, in the last few weeks, about Churchill had been cancelled for his views on India and blah, blah. Everyone's got some problem.
Character,
and I sort of get to the point where, we shouldn't really be allowed to play snooker anymore because we're using the white ball to hit the coloured balls. So it's how far do you want to take the ridiculousness? And, of course, you could argue that, snooker was invented under the Raj in India. How far do you take it?
You have to not be literal-minded, really,
but literalism is so much back. Every post I see on the internet is, why exactly? There's a plot hole in this film, and it really bugs me. And I never reply, obviously. I have much better things to do. Sure. But I always think, That's what makes the film fun for me.
Yeah.
Because clearly they couldn't get the dog to jump over that wall or something.
Yeah.
You know, someone said something about the Thing recently, the 1982 John Carpenter one, not the original one, and certainly not the remake, or prequel, I should say. Someone was saying something about, there's some plot hole in it, I can't remember what it was, and they said, it ruins the whole film for me, and I was just like, why?
Yeah, suspension of disbelief is the principle, really, isn't it? And you, again, it's how radio often does this, radio drama, of course, and I think your writing has this picaresque quality, because you can take us to where you want to take us, and you are storytelling.
Yeah.
Do you think the culture of storytelling is, present company very much accepted, do you think it's under threat, say, and can it be taught in these circumstances? Can it be invoked?
I've always felt that the massively important thing about storytelling, and one of the main things that separates us from animals, is that when we're a baby, or there's a baby animal, we both want milk. We both need the mother's milk, we both need to sometimes survive, but human children at some point say, tell me a story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is something, why do we need that as a species? You don't see, I don't know, whales, they may say, tell me a story, I don't know. But humans have this need to hear their parents say something that gives them comfort, which may or may not be a fairy tale, or may not be true, or may be true. It doesn't matter.
It could be scary, but there's an ending, and there's a sense of shape, of narrative arc.
Yeah, I mean, that's... And I find that's a fascinating thing about storytelling, that humans have this innate need, right from a very early age,
Yes.
to hear a story. Why is that?
It's very powerful. I can think to house parenting gigs in my social work job with young people where it's been absolutely the clincher on not only their day, but in that corner of their life to have heard somebody read them a story. And it's, I think it is something that's missing now. When I used to come and do the show here, I wouldn't ramble on, but I would see people working in the city on their phones trying to do this very thing in a crowded carriage. As an act of, righteously, of necessity. And presumably you can do it now with Eli.
But it's also such a massive thing, like, for example, communities, say the African-American community that didn't have songs that spoke to them, then the blues came along and started telling their story, and it became such an important thing.
Historical record.
It's still telling stories. It's the same tradition. In a way, right from Homer, I suppose, even the Bible.
So there's a body of work, but is the way to shore it up and ensure its future just to keep doing it?
I guess if you can, and also let's not forget, a lot of these things are cultural fads that come along generations on generations. I seem to think they work on
McCarthyism.
I used to think it was a 50-year, but I now think it's about a 75-year cycle.
That's a lifetime for...
Well, yeah. It's every other generation, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think maybe not even my son's generation, but my son's sons, or my son's children's generation, I think we'll probably be a lot more relaxed again. And then possibly down the line it'll go back to that. I don't know. I can merely speculate.
Yeah.
But
what has to happen for this to happen is that the groundwork is laid, presumably, and somebody will quietly notice.
There are still a lot of people that love telling those stories and writing those books and writing those symphonies and those plays and painting those paintings.
And the sheer effort of doing it, I mean, I compose a bit, you compose a bit more. You're about to write this musical. Is that book, music and lyrics?
Oh, no. No, the book and lyrics have been written by somebody else.
Right, and it's done. It's in the done.
That's actually a duo team called Laura Stanton and Paul Skidmore. Shout out to you guys.
I know Paul from Harrow days, I think.
Yes.
Very fine musician.
In fact, you may well have met him. They've written a book. I can't say what it's about because
under wraps.
In case someone else starts jumping and doing the same thing.
They better not.
But I've nearly finished Act 1, and it's going very well. And I've never written a musical. I've mainly written classical music. Online, I've got dozens and dozens of pieces, from really, heavily atonal orchestral things, or chamber orchestral things, to quite tonal piano ditties.
I think that, and having learned singing with you briefly, that your sense of line, it sort of regenerates, revives some of the things we're going to hear, not just the operatic ones in Interlude, but I suspect may also inform how you're writing this. I mean, what sort of voices are you writing for?
Well, that's exactly true. Yeah. Whenever I coach singers or teach singing, I always talk about this, you may remember this, the washing line idea.
Yes,
that it's one long thing, but every piece of washing on the line is attached to the line, but everyone is a different colour, everyone is a different shape, everyone, blah, blah, blah. And yes, so in this book, Selected Pieces, yes, there's a through line, but each one is a separate thing. And so yes, you're absolutely right there. I hadn't thought of it that way, but no, you're 100% right.
Do you know when this is going to get done yet? Or negotiations? This the musical?
Oh, the musical. Oh, it's very early days. I mean, as I said, we've only done Act 1. I've only done the music for Act 1. The whole thing is written script-wise.
Such is the nature of the gig.
Oh, if I may interrupt, Andy, I'm really sorry. But on page 42, for your avid listeners, you actually appear.
Incognito.
Well, true, you're not mentioned by name.
Well, you don't want to lower the tone, really, do you?
Well, the little paragraph that starts it is, 2 nights ago I found myself shivering in a back garden of a large house by the Thames up past Putney, giving a radio interview by mobile phone about Pierre Boulez, who died on January the 5th, 2016. Now, that person who was presenting a radio show was indeed our man here, Andy Bungay.
It was an honour. I remember sitting in the old place, having been relieved of my shift holding the bucket for the rainwater coming in, and talking to you very late on a Sunday evening. Thank you so much for doing that.
No, it was great fun. I loved Boulez. He was wonderful.
Well, he was, again, a guiding light, and such a nice chap, contrary to his public image.
Yeah, well, he needed that kind of, because of the serialist element, he needed that kind of terse thing, but he wasn't like that. He was ebullient and humorous and full of fun. And I tell some very fun anecdotes about him because he came to Royal College of Music quite a lot when I was there. I trained at Royal College of Music. And him and George Schulte and people like that, who are all now gone. They're the last generation. And somewhat incredibly, when I first met George Schulte, it occurred to me as I shook his hand that this man had conducted the funeral, conducted the orchestra at the funeral of Richard Strauss in 1949.
Boggling, isn't it?
So it's only one generation away from Richard Strauss, which is astonishing.
And the fact that they are there showing up, as it were, as the Americans would say, to pay it forward.
Yeah.
And as we're going to discover later, Ez, that's exactly what you're doing, I think, with this fine work.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Oh, always a pleasure. See you again soon. The protean, marvellous Ezra Williams, author of Selected Pieces, and before that, Fairy Tales and Oddities, and more besides. A horror novel coming up. Michaela Betts, as you mentioned earlier on, is getting interested in horror, and hopefully that isn't necessarily a salve to the political weather, but we live at interesting times, as the old Chinese curse has it. Anyway, a warm and sonorous good night. Thank you for your bespoke company, and thank you to Michaela Betts earlier on, and Dark Nature details coming up on the Mixcloud page, and Selected Pieces is available from TSLBooks.uk. I've gone slightly over the hour, so I'm going to list the naughty step from the powers that be. And very good evening to you, gents and ladies, if you're listening, with some David Gates and Bread, one of those alchemical, wonderful songs from the 70s, given new operatic life by Ezra Williams. See you next time.
I really think we can make it good. I